The first thing that felt wrong wasn't what he said. It was how certain he sounded before I had a chance to respond. Your sister owes $180,000. You're paying it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He just placed it in front of me like it had already been agreed on. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, my coat on, my keys near my hand, when I realized no one was waiting for my answer. My mother sat across from me with her hands folded, looking down instead of at me. Or you're no longer our child, my father added. That was the part that settled everything for me. Not because it hurt more, but because it made the choice clear. My name is Megan Carter. I'm 34 years old. I said it quietly, more to steady myself than to introduce anything. Then I looked at him and answered. Then I'm not. He didn't respond right away. My mother shifted slightly in her chair, but still didn't speak. For a moment, it felt like the room had paused, like they were waiting for me to correct myself. I didn't. I stood up, picked up my keys, and adjusted my coat. I noticed the smell of something left too long on the stove, sharp enough to linger, and wondered briefly how long they had been sitting there before I arrived. I had the sense this conversation had been planned without me. No one stopped me as I walked out. The drive home was quiet. I kept thinking about the number, not the conversation. $180,000 wasn't something that appeared overnight, and it wasn't something I had agreed to. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I set my keys down, sat at the table, and looked at my phone for a long time before unlocking it. I told myself I was just going to check something. I called my bank and asked them to pull up my accounts. Then I opened my credit report and started reading through it line by line, slower than I usually would. The numbers didn't match what I remembered, and some of the entries were unfamiliar. I kept going anyway. 5 days later, they were all standing outside my door, asking me to talk. When I opened it, I already knew what I was going to say, but the numbers didn't match what I had agreed to. The original loan was still there, the one I had co-signed years ago for around $45,000, but the balance attached to it now didn't match anything I remembered agreeing to. It had been refinanced. More than once. I opened the details and followed the timeline, moving backward first, then forward again, trying to understand how it had grown into something that large without me noticing. Each refinance closed out the previous balance and replaced it with a new one, slightly higher, stretched out over a longer term, as if someone had been buying time instead of solving anything. That alone would have been enough to explain part of it, but it wasn't the only thing on the report. There were additional accounts listed under my name, opened within the same period, tied to lenders I didn't recognize. The balances weren't small, and the payment histories didn't show anything consistent. Some had been paid for a few months, then left behind. Others looked like they had barely been touched. I clicked through each one carefully, checking dates, addresses, and account notes, forcing myself to slow down even as the pattern started forming on its own. Several of the accounts were linked to an address I hadn't lived at in years. My parents' house. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. Not because I didn't understand what I was looking at, but because I did. It wasn't confusion anymore, just something I didn't want to name yet. I opened the report again and started writing everything down, line by line, copying balances, lenders, and dates into a notebook so I could see it all in one place. The total climbed faster than I expected once I added it together, crossing the number my father had given me without any explanation for how it had been built. This wasn't one decision. It was a series of them, made over time, with my name attached to all of it. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't need to. The report had already said enough. The next morning, I went through everything again. This time, more carefully, with a notebook open beside me. I wrote down each account in order, starting with the original loan and moving forward, listing dates, balances, and lenders so I could see the sequence without flipping between screens. Once it was laid out, the pattern stopped looking complicated and started looking deliberate. Each refinance happened just before the previous payments became harder to maintain, extending the timeline but increasing the total. The newer accounts followed the same rhythm, opened within months of each other, each one adding more weight instead of resolving anything. It wasn't random, and it wasn't rushed. It had been done steadily. I pulled up the documents attached to a few of the accounts and compared the signatures. They were close enough to pass at a glance, but when I looked at them side by side, the differences stood out in small ways. In the spacing, in the way certain letters were formed. I checked the listed addresses again. Several of them pointed back to my parents' house, not mine. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the page, letting the sequence settle into something I couldn't dismiss. Once I saw it clearly, it didn't leave much room for doubt. This wasn't a mistake that needed correcting. It was something that had been built, step by step, with my name carrying it the entire way. And that meant someone had made the choice for me more than once. I didn't need to look at the documents anymore to understand where it had started. The first loan had been years ago, back when the number was small enough to feel manageable and the situation had been presented as temporary. We had been sitting in the same kitchen, though it felt different then. Quieter in a way that made it easier to agree to things without asking too many questions. My sister had been there, tense but hopeful. And my father had handled most of the talking. It's just paperwork, he had told me. She needs someone with stronger credit to help her get through this. It won't come back to you. I remember asking how long it would take to pay off, and he had answered without hesitation, giving me a timeline that sounded reasonable, something that wouldn't stretch beyond a year or two. My sister had nodded along, avoiding eye contact but not correcting him. I signed because it didn't seem like a risk at the time. I trusted them, and I didn't think I was stepping into something that would follow me years later, sitting at my table now, looking at everything that had grown from that moment. I could see how that first decision had opened the door to everything that followed. It hadn't been forced, and that made it harder to separate myself from it. I had said yes, even if I hadn't understood what that meant. But what came after that wasn't something I had agreed to. The refinances, the additional accounts, the use of my name without my knowledge. None of that had been part of the conversation I remembered. That was where it shifted for me. It stopped being about helping family and became something else entirely, something that had been built quietly while I assumed nothing had changed. I kept my phone in my hand longer than I needed to, reading through the same notes I had written the night before, as if going over them again might lead to a different conclusion. It didn't. The pattern was still there, and the numbers didn't leave room for anything I could ignore. For a few minutes, I considered doing nothing. It wasn't a full plan, just a quiet thought that maybe I could let it sit, talk to them first, find a way to handle it without bringing anyone else into it. That would have been easier in a way, or at least it would have delayed what came next. For a moment, I thought about calling my mother instead, just to hear her say this could still be handled quietly, like it hadn't already gone too far. But the longer I sat there, the clearer it became that waiting wouldn't undo anything. The accounts were active, the balances were growing, and my name was still attached to all of it whether I acknowledged it or not. Doing nothing would still be a decision, just not one I could control. I opened my contacts and called the number on the back of my card, navigating through the prompts until I reached the fraud department. When someone answered, I explained what I had found, keeping my voice steady and my answers direct. I need to report accounts that I didn't authorize. I said, there are multiple entries, and they all connect back to me. The representative asked me to confirm my identity and then went through each account with me, one by one, marking them for review. There was no hesitation on their side, just a process they followed carefully. We're opening a case, she told me. You'll need to place a freeze on your credit immediately. I understand, I said, and I meant it. I followed her instructions while we were still on the call, completing the freeze and confirming the details before ending the conversation. When it was done, I set the phone down and looked at the notes in front of me again. Nothing had changed on paper yet, but something had shifted in how I was handling it. I wasn't waiting for an explanation anymore. By the second day, the process had already moved beyond anything I could slow down or adjust. The bank confirmed the fraud case was active, and I contacted a lawyer recommended through a colleague, someone who had handled identity-related cases before and didn't need much explanation once I showed him the documents. He reviewed everything quietly, then outlined the next steps in a way that made it feel procedural rather than personal. We prepared certified letters to each lender involved, formally disputing the accounts and requesting verification. I signed what needed to be signed and let him send them out. On the third day, responses started coming in. Some lenders acknowledged the dispute and paused activity on the accounts, while others initiated their own verification process. A few of them requested confirmation tied to the addresses listed on file, which I already knew would lead somewhere I couldn't control. Some of the accounts were temporarily locked during the review, and at least one lender flagged a missed payment that hadn't gone through after the freeze, which meant the situation was already moving beyond what anyone could quietly fix. Several of those addresses pointed back to my parents' house. I didn't reach out to them to explain what was happening. I let the process move forward without stepping in, even when I knew the contact would eventually reach them. It felt different to let something unfold without trying to manage it. By that point, the situation had shifted from something internal to something documented, tracked, and reviewed by people outside of it. The decisions I had made were no longer just reactions. They had started something that would continue whether I stayed involved or not. The first call came late in the afternoon on the third day. Right as I was finishing up some paperwork at my table, I saw my father's name on the screen and let it ring without moving to answer. When it stopped, I stayed where I was, listening to the quiet in the room settle back into place. A minute later, the voicemail came through. His voice wasn't the same as it had been at the kitchen table. It was lower, less certain, as if he was choosing his words more carefully than usual. "Megan, call me back. We need to talk about what you've done." The next message came a few minutes later, sharper. "You don't understand what you've started," he said. "You're making this worse for everyone." I played it once, then set the phone down and didn't respond. More calls followed, closer together this time, first from him, then from my mother. I didn't answer any of them. I let each one go to voicemail, noticing the change in tone as they came in, how the certainty had started to fade into something less controlled. My mother's message was shorter. "We got a call about some accounts. You need to explain this." She didn't sound angry. She sounded unsettled, which was new. I sat there for a while, looking at the screen as another call came in and then stopped. The shift was small, but it was clear. They weren't telling me what I was going to do anymore. They were trying to understand what had already happened. I realized they were reacting for the first time. I still didn't call back. Whatever had reached them wasn't coming from me, and I wasn't going to step in to manage it. By then, they weren't just calling to be heard. They were calling because something had already reached them that they couldn't ignore. Her message came later that night, longer than anything she had sent before, and written in a way that made me slow down as I read it. It didn't start with an apology. It started with an explanation. She said the first loan had been manageable, that she had kept up with it for a while and believed she could handle the rest on her own. When things tightened, she refinanced to lower the payments, telling herself it was temporary. Then another loan followed, meant to cover the gap left by the first. After that, it stopped being something she could track. "I thought I could fix it before you noticed," she wrote. She admitted there were times she knew I might find out sooner, but she kept going anyway because stopping would have exposed everything at once. I read that line more than once, not because I didn't understand it, but because it explained more than I expected it to. She wasn't describing a single mistake. She was describing a series of decisions that had each made sense to her at the time, even as they pushed things further out of control. She said she hadn't told anyone at first, then admitted that our parents had known something was wrong, though she didn't say how much. She wrote that she never meant for it to reach this point, and that she had planned to take care of it without involving me again. I set my phone down after finishing the message and didn't pick it up right away. Understanding what she had done didn't change what I needed to do next. I didn't reply. By then, it wasn't about what she meant to do. It was about what had already been done. On the 5th day, they came to my apartment. I saw them through the small gap beside the door before I opened it, all 3 of them standing closer together than usual, as if they had arrived with the same purpose but didn't agree on how to begin. My father stood slightly ahead, my mother beside him, and my sister just behind, her arms folded tightly across herself. I opened the door and stepped back enough to give them space, but none of them moved inside. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice controlled but not steady in the way it had been before. "We are talking," I answered, staying where I was. He glanced past me into the apartment, then back at me. "Accounts are frozen. Payments didn't go through. We've been contacted by lenders. You need to fix this. This wouldn't have happened if you had just helped when we asked," he added, as if the situation had started with me. The word fix stayed between us longer than anything else he had said. "It's already been reported," I said. "There's an active case." My sister shifted forward then, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I was going to handle it. I just needed more time." "You already had time," I said, keeping my tone even. She shook her head quickly, as if that could change the direction of the conversation. "I didn't think it would get this big. I thought I could close everything out before it reached you again." "It reached me a long time ago," I said. "I just didn't see it yet." My mother stepped in then, her voice lower than I expected. "We knew something was wrong," she said. "Not everything, but enough to know it wasn't stable." I looked at her, waiting to see if she would say more. She didn't. That was the moment to stop it. I said. No one answered. My father exhaled slowly, as if trying to regain control of something that had already shifted. "You can still call them," he said. "Explain it. Tell them it's a mistake. It's not a mistake," I said. "And it's not something I can take back. The case has already been escalated. You decided what I was to you 5 days ago." I said. "This is just the part you don't get to control anymore." There was a long pause after that, the kind that doesn't leave room for negotiation. This was the first time they were standing inside something they couldn't direct. I held the door where it was, not opening it further, not closing it either. No one moved forward. After a moment, I closed the door. After that day, things moved without me. The accounts tied to my name were reviewed over the next few weeks, each one going through a process I didn't have to manage anymore. Some were removed quickly once the discrepancies were confirmed, while others took longer, but the direction didn't change. The case continued on its own, handled by people who didn't need my permission to move forward. My sister was charged with financial fraud. I didn't hear it from her. I heard it from my lawyer, in a short update that didn't include anything personal. My parents were pulled into the investigation as well, not as defendants at first, but as part of the pattern that had allowed everything to continue as long as it did. There were financial consequences they couldn't avoid, even if they didn't say it out loud. We didn't speak again. There are still days when I reach for my phone out of habit, thinking about calling, before I remember why I don't. My credit was restored gradually, not all at once, but enough that I could see the difference each time I checked. The numbers that had felt heavy before started to reflect something closer to what I had actually done, not what had been placed on me. I stayed in my apartment, kept my routines simple, and didn't try to rebuild anything I wasn't sure I wanted back. Distance didn't feel like loss the way I expected it to. There are moments when I think about how easily it could have gone the other way, how saying nothing would have kept everything in place a little longer. It would have looked calmer on the surface, but it wouldn't have changed where it was going. If there's anything I understand now, it's that clarity often comes with a cost, and avoiding that cost doesn't make the outcome better, just less visible. Protecting yourself isn't the same as turning your back on someone, even if it feels that way at first. I don't know if everyone would make the same choice I did. I just know what it cost and what it gave back. Now, in the mornings, I sit at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and the quiet around me doesn't feel empty. It feels earned.